Hi, this is Eric from Longbox Review at longboxreview.wordpress.com. On today's show, Peter Rios joins me to discuss Terry Moore's series Rachel Rising. You'll recall that Peter joined me on episode 62 to discuss Lazarus, and that was just the first part of a lengthy conversation that Peter and I had one Sunday. And you now get the next part of that conversation, which you will join in progress. I hope you enjoy it. All right, we are back with Peter Rios. Hi, Peter.
Hey, Eric. How are you?
Good. Glad you are back with me because we are going to talk about Rachel Rising by Terry Moore. So, Peter, I wanted to before we get into the book, I wanted to get your thoughts on the whole Save Rachel Rising thing. And Travis and I talked about that episode or two ago on the show. But considering that you and I have already talked about Rachel Rising in the last episode that you were in, I think it was through issue 8 at that point.
Right.
We were talking, but then a month within the last month, I'll say, at the time of this recording, Terry Moore went out and talked about how he may, because of the low sales of Rachel Rising, he may have to cut the story short. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that, and you know, what did you think about when you saw that and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I didn't follow it completely, so I don't know if there's been any sort of outcome. I know there have been tons of retweets and people trying to spread the word, and it would be unfortunate if he wasn't able to see it all the way through to the end. You know, maybe he has a certain issue number in mind, and if he has to cut that short, that would be unfortunate. It's the perils of self-publishing, because he really is self-publishing. I mean, in terms of content, maybe some people could say there are certainly more independent things out there, but it's all him. I mean, he lives and dies by order numbers and pre-order numbers. You know, this is a guy that has to pay his electric bill based on how many comics he sells, of Rachel Rising. Now, granted, he has other material out there that I'm sure he's benefiting from, but still, he wants this book to survive. And it kind of, without opening up a can of worms, it kind of annoys me at times. You know, there was while Image Comics may be a quote unquote independent publisher, they certainly have a lot of help in terms of a creator doesn't have to necessarily they have a publisher who's going to help them promote. And if they go to conventions, Image usually always has a booth, and at these big national conventions. Someone like Terry, it's all out of his pocket, and same thing with Image and other companies. I get that, but and Image has a small employee pool, but really it's Terry and his wife and maybe a couple of assistants that I don't know about. And I think that to me is true self-publishing independency. And it's unfortunate because I don't think enough creators and publishers, I don't think they train readers enough or educate readers enough on the importance of pre-ordering your book.
Yeah.
You don't have to pre-order Batman. You don't have to pre-order X-Men. But you better pre-order Lazarus, and you better pre-order Rachel Rising, and you sort of almost have to pre-order books like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of like a low tier but popular Marvel book or DC book. I mean, even just because it says DC and Marvel doesn't necessarily mean you can just go to the store and think it's always going to be there. It's not. So I'm glad that there was awareness. And it's frustrating that it has to come out of bad news, that's a possibility, because the book is good, and there's a larger story being told there, and he has the history. If you've read Strangers in Paradise, if you've read Echo, you shouldn't doubt that this is going to be quality work. So it is frustrating. Hopefully he got some new readers, and hopefully they know that the way to save it is by pre-ordering. You have to pre-order, or else retailers, if I was a retailer and only one person pre-ordered this book month to month, then I would get one book for him, one book for me, because I probably was reading it, and one book for the shelf. After this whole Save Rachel Rising thing, if suddenly 4 other people came in and say, hey, I want to pre-order Rachel Rising, well, now suddenly I have to get 5, 6, 7 copies. You know what? I'll just get 10 because maybe somebody else, So, yeah, it's taking a chance, but I'd rather have my customers buy books that I know are quality than just buy books because they're doing it out of habit. So building your customer base to buy books that they are really going to be invested in, and maybe they'll take a chance on other books of that nature, of that small publisher, of that small press creator. Now you're building a fan of those things that they will consistently purchase their stuff. Doesn't, and that's how you for retailers anyway, that's a great way to build customer support. Plus they're buying more of your merchandise. Hello. Why would you ever turn a customer away from a book that maybe, now this is a whole different topic, but that you didn't like, why would I never understood retailers or retailers who allow other customers say, oh, don't read that, that's junk. Well, maybe you think it's junk, but they like it, and you're taking money out of your cash register, stupid. So anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Yeah.
Anyway, but
yeah. Has
there been much push beyond now that it's sort of out there?
So yeah, that's a great question, and I was checking on that in preparation for our talk, and I could not find anything. So there was the article. I can't remember. Oh gosh, I've linked to it, but I can't remember the URL. So I may have to include that in the show notes. But there was a web page that brought this to attention, or to a larger audience, I guess, so to speak, beyond Twitter. And so I went there to check to see if there's an update. Nothing. I checked Terry Moore's Twitter feed to see if there's anything, an update. Nothing. So short of asking him directly, which I did not do, which I should go do that. Maybe I'll add that to the end of this episode if I get something by the time I'm getting ready to publish the episode. But so yeah, I'm wondering the same thing. Is it helping, or what's going on with this? Because I don't want this story to end just like we were talking about with Lazarus. I've had so much fun reading this comic, especially again in preparation for this episode. Everything is so fresh and clear, as clear as it can be, because there's a lot of twists and turns going on in this story. But everything is just, the whole idea of it is just really clear in my mind, and I'm excited about it, and I want to see where it goes. And I've heard that. I've read that issue 24 was the expected end of the story arc that he had, that first story arc, but that he had ideas to continue it on. And I think that's where this whole Save Rachel Rising thing came in, that he will have to cut it short at 24. And then this is all we get. I'm just guessing here, but I do know that I was checking cover images. I posted on Friday, I posted all of the cover images to Rachel Rising, 1 through 22, which is out right now. And then I found some images for 23 and 24 and a possible 25 issue cover. I'm not quite sure if that's accurate or not. So there's a possibility there that there could be more, and I'm hoping that we get more from more.
Yeah, more from more. Yeah, and it's tough because anything that has happened because of this campaign, and if it's only been a month, then we still may not see any outcome for another month or two,
right,
the way comics work. So it's kind of unfortunate that way. But hopefully, hopefully it does. I mean, it's a good series.
Update. Since Peter and I got together to talk about Rachel Rising, some time has passed, and in the latest issue of previews for February for comics coming out in April, Rachel Rising number 25 is solicited, and this begins a new story arc. Back to the show.
And he's just a great creator and a great guy. Like
he is. I met him at. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say those are the creators you want to support.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I met him at last year's Emerald City Comic Con. He was there, and he was so good. He was so gracious, and he's very quiet, and I've heard that about him. It kind of reminded me of me a little bit in a public setting. It's hard to believe that I might be shy, but I am. But a little bit, and so he was just really unassuming, and he seemed really appreciative, that I was excited about his stuff, and I wanted to, I got the was it the 10th anniversary Strangers in Paradise print that he did of Kachu, and cool. I met his wife, and he signed the stuff. He signed my issue number 1 of Rachel Rising, and he was just really cool, and yeah, exactly like you say. For creators like that are really cool, really nice, it just makes you want to support their work and promote it, and that's exactly what I'm doing here. So, Travis and I talked about it, just the whole momentum, the movement, if you will, episode or two ago. But now Peter and I are going to talk about the actual work. So I don't know, right. Peter, do you just want to talk about it as a whole, or, like I said, in that last episode that you were on a year and a half ago or so, we talked up through issue 8. So maybe we should just kind of talk about it as a whole. I'm guessing. What would you like to do?
Yeah, it sounds that way because I actually had to go back and start from the beginning again. I didn't realize it had been so long since we talked about it, and that also meant that that's the last time I probably read the stuff, even though I was still collecting it. So I went back and reread those 8 issues again and said, oh yeah, right, that happened. Oh right, that happened.
Yeah.
And then then we have up to issue 22. So that's a lot of issues to talk about individually. So I think you're right. I think just sort of hitting some bullet points, and maybe if we can try to maybe hit it in a more chronological order, but I think that's the smart way to do it.
Okay. Do you want to give the folks just a brief synopsis of what this comic is about?
Because that's easy. Especially with this one. No, the title, interestingly enough, really says it all. There's a girl named Rachel who rises from the dead and doesn't realize what happened. She has just very fleeting memories. The people around her kind of take it in stride a little bit, weirdly. But they have questions too. Yeah, and you start to see that there's this mystery going on in this town of Mason, which I think is up in the New England states, and you start to see that there are other women who also rise from the dead, and there's this mysterious woman who seems to be who seems to be the center of all this. Then there's also a little girl that also has a part to play. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of bad people. There's a few good people. One of Rachel's best friends also dies and gets revived. And you learn that 300 years ago, the town of Mason, the townspeople of Mason, killed 100 women for the fear that they were witches. And you start to think, oh, okay, so are these witches coming back to life? And eventually you learn a little more of the story, and you realize, there's a larger thing going on, not only with the witches, but between other denizens of biblical reference. And I guess we'll get to that when we talk about it. But I think that's a loose premise. I don't know if you want to add to that.
I think that's pretty good. So like you said, Rachel is the main character. Her name is Rachel Beck. and her best friend that you mentioned also, his name Jet, who I don't know if you remember, Peter. She appeared in Strangers in Paradise.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there is one point where in the issue, I can't remember what issue it was. It's a later issue, but Rachel's aunt Johnny has a painting of one of Kachu's paintings in her house, or it's in Johnny's former lover's house. I can't remember which one. Anyway, and so they're looking at that. So there's the connection there to Strangers in Paradise. But then Jet talks about when she used to work at that studio.
Oh.
And she had an interaction with what's his name, Freddie.
Right.
from yeah, okay. So there you go. There's your Strangers in Paradise connection, and I suppose I also read that there is a connection to Echo in this as well, and I'll talk about that when we get to it. And like I said, okay. So go ahead.
Well, I was going to say wasn't there also a connection to Strangers in Echo?
Yes. Yes. A couple of the characters, I can't remember their names, showed up towards the end of that series.
Okay. Because I still haven't read Echo, but I knew that all three of these titles took place in the same universe.
Yeah. Which is really weird because I've read Echo as well as Strangers in Paradise, of course, and so it's when you see those connections, it's like, oh, that's cool, but then you think about it, it's like, well, how does this all fit together? And with the super science of Echo and this the mystic quality, the supernatural quality of Rachel Rising. So it's a really interesting world that Terry Moore has created in these three titles.
You've read Strangers, right?
Yeah.
And that was the thing about Strangers in Paradise that we're already off on a tangent.
Yeah.
But, when people used to describe Strangers in Paradise, they would talk about the relationship between the three main characters, not even just the two, but the three: Kachu, Francine, and David. And they used to talk about, and they used to say, hey, it's a very real world look at the relationships between this triangle, blah 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 blah. And after I finally read it, sure, there are definitely it's definitely more real world than Echo and Rachel Rising, but there are elements in Strangers that actually I think really do kind of touch on, if not supernatural, on the things that the way that we treat those elements in the real world. So, Francine seeing a vision, or what else was there? There were some other things, I think somebody's ancestor, they came across somebody's ancestor, like a vision of an ancestor or something like that. Francine had a feeling about something disastrous that happened to Kachu. So there were elements of that in Strangers in Paradise. And there were certainly some I call sort of like cartoon moments, like in one of the very first times we see Kachu, she shoots an alarm clock. Well, who does that? I mean, that's not real world. That's abnormal in the real world. Yeah. So I think he was creating that, but allowing for those things, which is why I think we get these other stories like Echo and Rachel Rising. Yeah. So anyway, just my thought about that.
Yep. No, that's great. Yeah, I agree with you. It's like I said, he's set up I kind of made it sound like it was this weird, unusual mishmash of stuff, and it's really not. He's created the Moore world, if you will, that allows for those things. So yeah, I think it fits just fine. So let's see. I just want to run through some of the major characters here real quick, so people can understand who we're talking about in case they have not read this, or
that's great.
Or we're waiting to read it in trade. That's a lot of the responses I saw on Twitter and other places was people like, yeah, say Rachel Rising, but I get it in trade. So I'm not sure how that helps exactly, but. I understand it. That's actually how I started this series. I read Strangers in Paradise in those pocketbook formats, I came late into that, but fell in love with it. Echo 2, I could have got that off the shelf, and I didn't for some reason, and I bought the entire collection and read it all in one night, and that's what it was like. Okay, wow. So I read that and I'm like, wow, this is so cool, this is so good. I love both of those books, and I hear Rachel Rising. Oh, okay, I enjoy the experience of reading Echo in one shot like that. I'm going to do the same thing with Rachel Rising. So I got the first trade and I read it. And I'm like, okay, I cannot do this. I have to read this, issue to issue. And so I went and got the first 6 issues, and then have been getting it ever since as he releases them. Like, I don't think he comes out every month like DC and Marvel Comics do, although those don't always do that either anymore. But I think it's like a 6-week schedule or something like that, and he might take a break every once in a while. I don't know exactly when everything's come out at what time frame, but it's pretty consistent, because I think like you're saying, with him being it all begins and ends with Terry Moore getting the work done and getting it out there.
Exactly.
I would think he needs to hit his release dates, if you will, to keep those sales consistent and ongoing. So anyway, so I've been with it ever since then, and it's, like I said, it's been great. But let's see. So back to the cast of characters. I mentioned Aunt Johnny. So she's a mortician, or what do you undertaker? I'm not sure what the appropriate term here is.
Yeah, she works at the morgue.
Yeah. So like I said, she's Rachel's aunt. And so you're talking about visions with Francine, I think. So Aunt Johnny claims to see dead people. So when Rachel first comes back from the dead and goes to see her Aunt Johnny, Johnny thinks that she's an apparition.
Right.
Because as Rachel first encounters people after she's come back, they're like, "Who are you?" And she's like, "I'm Rachel," and they're like, "No, you're not." So that thread runs through the first 6-ish or so issues. Let's see. You mentioned the little girl. Zoe is her name, and wow, I can't wait to talk about what she does and what she's about, because Rachel, following Rachel's story is interesting, but Zoe, she's almost stealing the show for me, Peter, in this book.
I could see that.
Then we have the other. So we mentioned the witches, and there are witches in this book. In fact, they are reincarnated witches in a sense, of which Rachel is one. We find out.
Although she doesn't know it at first.
Yes, because she doesn't remember this stuff, and she's chided by one of the girls for this. And one of them is the witch's name is Mary Scott, but she comes into the body of her name is Lindy, and she is Zoe's. I think she's a foster sister, whom Zoe kills in one of the issues in a barbaric, gruesome way. We'll get to that. And then there's another girl. Her witch name is Hannah. I shouldn't say witch name. That's not her former name is Hannah. But she goes in the body of a woman whose name is Natalie, who was about to get married that following week, and then something happens to her. We'll talk about that. There's Earl, and we talked about him in the previous episode, but he is a coroner's assistant who is in love with Jet, and he's this big, quiet guy. He's just a really interesting, what do I want to say here? Not partner. Geez.
Just a character, someone who, if you want to look at it this way, in a comic about burning witches and female leads, you're going to get the whole female versus male juxtaposition or story. Certainly in Strangers in Paradise, it was a lot about men versus women, not men versus women, but you know what I mean, the roles that they play. And in a world like Rachel Rising, and with what Terry Moore is giving us in terms of some of the other men in their lives, such as Jet. She's a car mechanic, and the guy that she works with is, just bawdy and rude and perverted and silly. And then Zoe, because she's in the foster care program, after she kills that girl, she has to be sent to another foster couple, and the male version of the foster couple is a pedophile. So we're seeing all these men, and they're doing bad things intentionally or through supernatural means. And here's Earl, the one sort of shining knight, and yet he's encased in the body of a beast. He kind of looks like
there you go.
He's kind of like the Kingpin almost. He could be the Kingpin's cousin.
Yeah.
So I think what he's given, I look at it as that, this is sort of Terry Moore saying, look, this is a male that these women can trust.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there's not too many of those in this. There's
no.
And even some of the male characters that we are introduced to, who Rachel and others interact with and are trusting with their secret, they're not exactly who they appear to be on the outside. And Earl is one of those, pretty much, he is what you see. What you see is what you get with him, in a sense.
Right.
There might be one other person, and that's the detective, although we haven't seen enough of him yet, although we're 22 issues in. But he might be one of those as well. But he's certainly not the main focus. One of the characters that I'm referring to, as far as is not what it seems, is Dr. Seaman. I think that's how you say that. He's an associate of Johnny's. He's a weird dude. That's what I have in my notes, and that's what I'm going to say. He's a weird dude. He's got his, I'll say, mummified corpse of his wife in his house, because he's trying to unlock the secrets of life and death, and he's been doing it. Apparently, it's implied that he's been doing it since maybe even the 16th century. Right. The whole alchemy thing. Yes. Yeah. When I first read that alchemy bit from him, I thought, he was interested in alchemy, so he's read about it, he's investigated it perhaps, but then they have that where he tells Earl that story about Sleeping Beauty, and the actual story, at least according to or at least in Terry Moore's universe, this is how it goes, and it's very clear that the religious guy in that, the friar, I can't remember, I don't know what he is exactly, but I call him the friar in my notes. That is Dr. Seaman. So it's this whole thing is just so many layers to it, so many connections. So also, at first At first I thought that he was just sort of projecting himself into that story, as a way to coerce Earl to do something. I thought he was just sort of using himself as that character. But then later, in one of the later issues, he even mentions, he rattles off some kind of scientific thing, and Rachel says, "You don't learn that from science." He goes, "Right, I learned that from Da Vinci." And you just kind of go, wait a minute, what? Is he just saying that because you can read about Da Vinci, or is he saying it because he's been around since Da Vinci? He's an interesting character. Yeah. Let's see here. I mentioned Carol before. That's Johnny's former lover. And so she comes back into the story as Johnny is recovering in the hospital from an accident. And then couple more. Now here we get into the supernatural aspects, the really supernatural aspects, because we get introduced to Malice, who is a former archangel and was an ally, or is sort of an ally of Lilith, who is the mysterious woman that you mentioned earlier. Lilith actually, so this is the Lilith from the Christian stories. She's the first woman, not Eve, it's Lilith. And so she basically, the story revolves around her desire to come back and get revenge on the descendants of the townspeople who tried to kill her and the other witches and all the other women who were a victim of their gender in that situation. And then finally,
Right, because it turned out it. I was going to add to that. It turned out 300 years ago when they killed all 100 women because they thought they were witches or whatever. It turned out only 4 of them actually were women, and the rest were, as you say, a victim of the zealotry that was going on there.
mm-hmm. And then finally, we have the other supernatural character that shows up a couple times, and that's, I don't know how to say this exactly, but I'll say Mamalai.
Mamalai, yeah, that sounds good.
So that is
the angel of death.
Yes, angel, and also was referenced in Strangers in Paradise.
Huh? Look at that.
So I think it was there was, you know how Terry Moore peppered in songs and poems throughout the whole Strangers in Paradise run? I think
right.
This character was mentioned in one of those.
Okay.
But she, this character, it's shown as a she. Say that 5 times fast. She shows up a few times throughout the run here and plays an important part in Lilith's life, and I think we'll get to that in a little bit. So, Peter, shall we just briefly go through issue by issue the plot points that we want to hit and just talk about those things as we go?
Where do you want to start from? Issue 1 or after what we talked about before?
Let's do issue 1. Let's just run through them as quickly as we can.
It was so funny when we did those first 8 issues, I went back and looked at the show notes and I said, oh, okay, we only did the first 8 issues. Great. So I read those first 8 issues again. Then you get to issue 9 and like issue 9 blows up the story. And I said, damn, if only it's a shame issue 9 wasn't out back then. But,
well, and
all right, so
you mentioned that. So I also wonder too, you know, like I said, as far as I know, issue 24 is kind of like the ending of the first story arc. So it's a pity that we're not waiting for that to come out. But you know, that'll be another 3 months probably.
2-3 months.
2-3 months. Yeah. So
we can do an addendum.
There you go. Okay, go ahead.
All right, so issue 1. So just real quickly, as he said, a strange blonde woman is watching Rachel rise out of the ground. Rachel has memories of being strangled by someone who you only see one eye on this guy. And she goes home and she loses a couple days and she visits her best friend because she was supposed to go out with Jet on the night that she was killed. She realizes it's about 2 or 3 days later and she doesn't understand what happened to her, why she has her blood vessels in her eyes are all red and she has strangulation marks around her neck. And she visits other people who say, you're not Rachel. She must be very pale. She has no idea what's going on. That's the setup of issue 1. She just rises out of the ground. It takes a couple of pages to show, and that leads us to the end of issue 1.
You know, it's actually, I think it's more than a couple of pages because I counted it's 9 pages of silence except for one time where Rachel cries out as she's getting out of the grave, but it's 9 pages of silence showing her resurrection, which I thought, you know, in today's, I guess, pacing in comic books, that's something you rarely see. Let alone, you know, you're not reading words on a page. That's so unusual these days, and yet it was so evocative of the tone and the setting and the setup of the series. You know, so Terry took that time to show us what that's like. You know, to find yourself in a shallow grave and digging yourself out and just being so shocked by everything. You know, it was just, you know, he wanted to tell a horror story with this book, and he's certainly starting it out, I think, very successfully.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
You know, it's funny. You mentioned so she has that flashback about her murderer. I did not realize that only one eye was showing. I mean, I saw it on the page, but I kind of took that as a trick of shadows, you know, so she's only seeing one eye because of the, you know, and that may be true, but now that you mention that like that, you know, maybe it is just a one-eyed guy. So
yeah, we haven't seen any evidence of that to this date. So I don't know. It just was a strange, Terry Moore is too calculated, you know, I can't imagine he just did that on the whim. So We'll see.
And there is, so who is her murderer? During one of the flashbacks, we find out that she was going to go out with some old high school guys, and that's why she was after Jet to go with her. Jet, of course, didn't. So was it one of them that did it, or was it some other person that encountered her or stalked her or whatever? We still don't know. 22 issues in, we still don't know who her murderer was.
Right.
And it was. I thought too it was interesting because you read that first issue and you think that this is the setup of the series. Once Rachel starts to tell people what happened to her, including her resurrection, when she finally convinces them of this, it's about trying to find out who did this to her. Except that's not exactly where this series goes. So
right.
we'll get to that. Let's see. As far as issue 1, I think you've covered everything, and I had in my notes too. So, but except for I want to expound on the bit with the big guy at the end of issue 1. I think his name is Lewis, and he's the first one that says you're not Rachel. Yeah. Or maybe it was the girl with him, but anyway, he's also put off by her too. It's like, this is not the person I know her to be. And so you get that thread that runs through the next several issues. And he shows up too later in the book and has an interesting point of view about something that I'll get to, I think.
Cool.
All right. Issue 2?
Issue 2. So Rachel needs some answers. So she goes to her aunt Johnny, who works in a mortuary, thinking that she'll get answers from her. Johnny just sort of wraps it up as being, I'm just working late, so I'm just seeing visions. So she doesn't trust her eyes. She doesn't trust that this is Rachel. And, Rachel's getting tired of it. So she goes, all right, I'm going to drive you to the place where I woke up. But before we get there, we see Zoe. She wakes up and she interacts with that strange blonde woman that saw Rachel rise in issue 1. And because of that interaction, or so we're led to believe at this point, Zoe's foster sister comes home. Well, actually, she was out making out with her boyfriend in the car. And when she comes into the house, Zoe decks her with a pan, wraps some plastic around her, and kills her. Strangles her, suffocates her, and then drinks a Slurpee while she watches. And meanwhile, Rachel and Johnny go out to the location where Rachel dug herself out of the ground. Finally, Johnny comes to her senses and she thinks she's dead. She thinks she's still seeing a vision of Rachel dead. And Rachel's like, no, this is really me. And we need to find out what is going on. There's some little other mysteries that we find. There's a cord in the grave site. We learn that the field where Rachel dug herself out of was the scene of that crime 300 years ago where they slaughtered 100 women. And I think we also get another one of those "you're not Rachel" moments that Johnny gives to her, I think, when she sees her for the first time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that scene with Zoe and her sister, the brutality of it is bad enough, especially coming from a child. But there's this one panel where she's hit her sister with that frying pan, and her sister is coughing and bleeding all over the place, and then she wraps her in that Saran wrap, and then her sister's just laying there, and she's there's the dialogue boxes, and she's muffled, and it just gets quieter and quieter and quieter, and then she's dead. And then the next panel is Zoe, with a slurp sound as she's drinking her drink.
Right.
And was just that when I read that the first time, I was like, oh my God, what the hell am I reading here?
And at this point, it just, as a reader, I just assumed that this mysterious blonde woman walking around is making Zoe do this. We realized later the true story that's going on behind here. But between this scene and the scene that happens in the next issue, at this point, I'm just thinking, Well, that blonde woman, she's up to no good.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And so, yeah, you mentioned too, she was in issue 1, she's there standing over watching Rachel come out of that grave. So did she have something to do with, this is what I was thinking. Did she have something to do with Rachel being there in the first place? Or is she just witnessing this, or, somehow shepherding her resurrection? And then she shows up with Zoe and bad things happen. So, okay, so bad things happen when blonde woman shows up. So that's pretty much the premise right now of her.
Right.
Let's see. I don't think I have anything else as far as issue 2. So
okay.
let's move on. Yeah, I wrote in my notes, Zoe kills her sister in a particularly gruesome and disturbing scene, and that is just the first of many.
Should we go to 3?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. So Jet, Rachel's best friend, is also a musician. So Rachel goes to the club where she's playing, and we get a little bit more of some mysteries. She runs to the bathroom and coughs up, what she thinks is rope. And someone else comes into the bathroom, and it's this woman. We'll find out her name is Natalie, who she becomes important later. And she tells Rachel that she just was proposed to, and she's going to marry this weekend, or she just got a necklace, and she's going to marry on the weekend. Rachel says, "No, you're not. You're going to be dead." And she basically it's almost like she reads her fortune. There's a connection here that we won't discover until later, but she says, you're going to be in the ground. Your lungs are going to be full of mud, and she's basically saying, she's reading Natalie's future, even though she doesn't realize it. She goes back out into the club. We see the blonde woman out there yet again in the club, and this time she talks to Noah, who is Natalie's future husband. And in the same sort of instance of, is she manipulating? Is she not? Although in this case, I think she is. She instills in Noah this idea that Natalie will eventually drop him and leave him years later. So a little bit later on, I forget why Rachel sees this woman and looking at her, so she follows her up into the roof of the bar. She notices a fire in the distance. She doesn't see the woman, but then she does see the woman. It's like that blonde woman just appeared on another roof.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, Rachel is hit by the body of Natalie, who she just saw in the bathroom, and they both tumble down and smash onto the hood of a car. And we realize that the man that the blonde woman was talking to, Noah, he threw Natalie off the roof of the bar. And we just see them looking at each other in the moonlight. And then the last scene in this book is a close-up of that fire that was in the distance, and here it turns out to be Zoe's house. She set the house on fire, and she's dragging the corpse of her foster sister, stuffing her into a car and driving away as the fire engines race to the fire.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So the blonde, talks in Noah's ear and puts this idea in it. There's 2 things about this that I wanted to point out. So one is that we see that the blonde has, as you say, definitely can influence things and cause people to do things. So that kind of reinforced the idea that she caused Zoe to do what she did, right? So far anyway. And right. So, but it's one thing to put the bug in a person's ear about their future partner, and then cause them to kill that person instead of just breaking up with them, So right. So there's definitely some nefarious influence there that the blonde is able to exact, and it also struck me as she, as we find out, she's come back to make the townspeople pay for killing all those women and trying to kill her and the other witches, and yet she has no compunction about causing someone else to kill another person. And we find out why, of course, because that.
Right.
Well, okay, we find out that Natalie then becomes inhabited by this, I guess, the spirit of one of those witches.
Mhm.
But is it why is it Natalie, or is it just a randomness about these resurrections? We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
I just found it really funny that the woman who was trying to exact revenge on the townspeople for killing people for no good reason would do that to another woman, or have a guy do that to another woman.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know. It was a weird comparison to me between what happened and what she caused to happen.
Right. By this point in the story, I mean, having, when I had only read the first 3 issues, I remember thinking, okay, she's either killing the witches or people that she thinks will become witches, or she's making the witches. She's killing, she's making it so that these women die, so that the witches enter them. And maybe they have to die in a certain way, at a man's hand or through violence, for the resurrection to take place. I thought maybe there might be some things that they had to follow certain events for it to happen. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think that's really what it is. They have to die a certain way in order to allow the spirit to come in.
Right, because later she talks about how these certain women died, and I really should go, and maybe you have some notes on it, but I should really look to see if it's comparable to the way that these future women died.
Yeah. I do have some notes on it, but I guess I was a little confused by Natalie's case, because she talks about Hannah having been killed by having them stuff a snake in her. And that does happen to Natalie. The snake does enter her, but it's not the way she was killed.
Right.
So that was interesting.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, not sure.
All right. And then the other thing I wanted to mention about this issue is, so as you said, Jet is at this club. She's playing. And there's a scene where Rachel comes in and Jet clearly sees her, but she has a weird expression on her face, or either that, or when I first read it, I was thinking, well, she's busy performing, so she just got a glance of her friend that she hasn't seen in days. And then, but then they talk and make plans to talk later, because Rachel wants to tell Jet what's happened to her. And at that point, that's when Jet comments that she had seen Rachel there, but wasn't sure it was her. So yet again, we get that, Rachel isn't who she is talk. So again, in issue 3, we get it. So I think that's all I have on there. You want to go to issue 4?
Sure. So after the events of last issue with Rachel tumbling down to that car, well, now they really think she's dead. And Jet and Johnny go to the mortuary, and this is where we meet Earl for the first time, and they have to identify the body, and it's her. But then she comes to life, and she's there, and she's trying to say to them, look, this is what I've been trying to tell you, that this has been going on. And she doesn't understand what had just happened. And she mentions that there was another woman that pushed her off because she was thrown off the top of the building. And they say, well, there was no one else there. It was just you. Well, that's because Noah, who threw Natalie off the roof of the bar, is taking Natalie to that same field where Rachel was and trying to bury her. He sees a snake enter Natalie's body. He has no idea what's going on. He buries her. He's confused. And in comes Zoe, who was driving away from the scene of her crime, smashes into the car that Noah was driving and says, hey, can you help me out here? And they carry the body of Zoe's foster sister into those same woods. I guess they have to be buried there because that's where the spirits probably lie. And before we get there, Johnny's trying to make sense of everything that's going on with Rachel and why isn't she dead. But she knows some people that she can call, and we'll find that out next issue. And back in the field, after they bury Zoe's foster sister, she attacks Noah and tries to drown him in dirt. and then she comes across the mysterious blonde lady, and she says, "You're a bad lady. You're making me do bad things." But we don't know that, right? And the blonde lady says, "What if you need me?" And Zoe says, "I'll never need you again." And that's how that issue. Again, we still don't quite know what's going on by this point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to point out too, so this is issue 4. Johnny, and once Rachel comes back again, that's when Johnny realizes, oh, that entire time that I was talking to Rachel in the morgue, and the entire time that I went in the car with her to Fire Hill, which is where that gravesite is, that actually was her. And it was only after she sees her dead body and then the resurrection in the morgue again that she realizes, oh yeah, that wasn't just an apparition.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting.
And they all seem to
go ahead.
They all seem to be taking this. They take it in stride. If a dead person popped up, I think I would run. So that's when I sort of say, okay, these worlds that Terry Moore has built, things happen to his characters in their lives. There's a reason why Johnny is the way she is, and why she's a mortician and all that. They leave very colorful lives, and I think they see far more than we do, and that's why I can never really say that these are real world characters.
Yeah.
They're treated fairly real, but they don't necessarily always react the way I think we would.
Well, yeah,
and that's okay.
Especially when you're in a morgue identifying a loved one and they suddenly sit up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's really, yeah, you're right. It's very interesting how, I won't say calm. Calm's not the right word, but they're not as affected by these strange events as we think they should be. Or then again,
right.
Peter, maybe we just need to experience this firsthand before we should make comments about these characters.
Very true. Very true.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'll take issue 5 because I don't have much on this one.
Okay.
So Johnny calls in Dr. Seaman to consult on this. This is the person that she was referring to. So Dr. Seaman comes in and here we go again. I think it's almost every issue. Dr. Seaman tells Rachel that she isn't Rachel, but he goes a little bit further. So he continues that theme, but he says, "You're not Rachel. You're Mama Lai, the angel of death." And they just kind of drop that. They don't really talk about that much. And then there's you talked about this earlier, Peter. This is where another foster couple comes to take care of Zoe, and you find out that the foster father is not quite a nice guy. And Zoe gets away from him, and as he's running after her, he's screaming, "Don't believe anything that brat says," or something to that effect. And she gets into an elevator. He gets trapped in the elevator doors. And you have this interesting, gruesome decapitation scene. So Zoe is a kid you do not want to be around, as cute as she may look.
Bad things happen.
Yeah.
And right before that happens, she says to Mr. Boyle that there's a lady that I see, and she shows up there behind Mr. Boyle. She says, when I see this lady, bad things happen.
Yeah.
And sure enough, something does happen. Again, pushing that idea that we don't know the connection between these two, but right now, as a reader, you sort of favor Zoe because we don't know everything about Zoe yet. Also in this issue, I thought the scene between Rachel and Jet while Johnny is cooking dinner and they're waiting for Mr. Seaman to get there to eat dinner and talk about all this. I think that scene between them two is just great. It's just, the flashbacks to when they're a kid and they pinky swear that they will always tell each other everything, and some of the physicality he gives both of them, just really, really great cartooning, great storytelling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I wanted to talk about that, but I didn't have it in my notes for this issue. But just the interaction between Rachel and Jet is rife with wonderful comedic moments, but also you get that real sense that close connection they have as lifelong friends.
Yeah.
Which I guess in a way mirrors. I can't help but compare it to Strangers in Paradise, right? Because you got these two women who have been friends for a long time and what they go through. So I kind of have to. I think about it anyway. I'm not necessarily saying I'm comparing the two sets of characters, but with Francine and Conchu and then Jet and Rachel. But it's an interesting. Mr. Moore likes to develop these relationships with these characters, and it's not always between two women, but between these two books, it certainly is. But Jet is so much fun. Her little. There's one point where. Later in the series, we'll probably get to this, but she apologizes for Carol being Catholic, and it was just a real under the breath type of comment, but it made me laugh out loud.
She is a fun character, yeah. I do like her.
Let's see, anything else on 5?
Nope. All
right, so number 6. We'll just go back and forth every few issues, if you don't mind, Peter.
Okay.
Starting off. So Natalie shows up, just as Rachel did in the first issue, walking towards town. Another person. So we didn't mention this, but a guy stopped and helped Rachel get home, and he was a nice enough guy. This guy, however, he's kind of he doesn't look like a really nice guy. But he tells her that he's trained. I think he was in the military or something, trained in medicine or whatever. And he keeps feeling, Moore doesn't show this exactly, but you get the sense, he keeps feeling her and saying, "Does it hurt here? Does it hurt here?" And I get the sense that his hand keeps moving up her leg. As he's doing this. And so, he's not exactly a good guy. And that's when the snake that went into Natalie comes out of her mouth and attacks this guy. And it's just, I don't like snakes. So that scene where that snake shoots out of her mouth and it's got its toothy mouth wide open heading towards this guy's face. And it's gruesome scene. Let's see here. Rachel, Jet, and Johnny go back to the club to investigate the accident where she fell off the building, or she was, pushed off by Natalie. There they encounter, Rachel notices Zoe is there. And Rachel also sees the blonde, but no one else can see her. So she walks over to the blonde and they have a conversation. Let's see. No one but her and Zoe can see her. And then we also find that Dr. Seaman, like I said before, I mentioned this before, but Dr. Seaman, as I said in my notes, is a bit wacky. He still has his dead wife in the house and talks to her. And this is a mistake of me hitting the caps key when I was taking notes, Peter, but it was really funny how as that happened, that whole line, his dead wife in the house and talks to her, is all in caps in my notes. Yeah. Let's see. The women, after Rachel has a conversation with the blonde, the women decide to take Zoe to the authorities, and as they are doing so, they get into a wreck in the snow, and that's something that comes up, I think, really starting this issue, is the focus on the prevalent snow, and it gets worse and worse as the series goes on. And unfortunately, Jet dies in this issue and dies in front of Rachel, which was a sad scene. But the issue ends with Jet in the morgue, and there's these nice panel progressions of showing just her face from a side view on the table, dead, 1, 2, 3, and then boom, she opens her eyes, and then the issue ends. And talk about a great cliffhanger moment. I think of a lot of terms or stories in terms of television, and this is certainly one of those. And considering that Terry Moore had a background in television, it makes perfect sense that he would do something like this. Have this dead character open their eyes at the end of the episode, and then bring everybody back the next week, or in this case, the next issue. Yeah,
and this being issue 6, I mean, this almost every scene in the back half of the book could have been the cliffhanger. We could have had the cliffhanger at the end of Rachel and the mysterious woman talking, where she says, she says, "Remember the snow, sister." And she says, "Sister," and and then she says, "And they shall fall like snow." Or it could have been the reveal of Dr. Seaman and his wife, or it could have been just the accident that we didn't see. We see sound effects as we pull away. Terry Moore doesn't actually show the accident; he shows sound effects. That could have been the cliffhanger, or Jet's death could have been the cliffhanger. But no, it goes all the way to her coming back to life, which I thought was a great use of the comic form throughout this whole issue.
Yeah, and actually, now that you're talking about this, it occurs to me that each one of those potential cliffhanger endings, it could be, pick a particular show style for what that would represent. So I think maybe the Dr. Siemens reveal, that might be like a Twin Peaks type, ending episode thing,
Mm-hmm.
or and Jet waking up. Well, that could be just about any show that has a supernatural aspect to it, but yeah,
right.
That's a very good point. I hadn't thought of that before.
I guess he figured 6 issues in, he needs to move the story a little bit along.
Yeah. And it is 6 issues that comprises that first trade. So here you go. You got the trade collection, and I think it ends very well, and certainly makes me want to read more. And obviously it did, because that's exactly what happened. I started picking up issue by issue at that point.
Great.
And speaking of the next issue, number 7, this is where I think we first encounter Detective Corpel. He's at the hospital to get information about the accident that is, quote unquote, killed Jet. Johnny is seriously injured and in the hospital. Rachel tells him about the girl, Zoe, who has disappeared. He thinks that Zoe's probably in shock and just wanders off, and so he's going to try and find her. Earl is about to embalm Jet when she revives herself. And the issue ends with Zoe walking past a cemetery, and then bodies start exploding upwards out of their graves, and she runs off screaming. And I think the last panel shows the bodies have fallen to form a pentagram.
Crazy. I guess that's just adding. It was sort of like an interesting visual to give us a little bit more about Zoe. Now that I think about it in hindsight, sort of makes you think, oh, maybe Zoe is the cause of some things, because they never really go back to this, explain why that happened.
But there is an echo of the pentagram in a later issue where Detective Corpel starts putting in pins in the map to denote all of the killings that have happened in the town, and they do form a pentagram. So, but it was a curious oddity at that time, and besides the other appearance of a pentagram, it hasn't really been expounded upon. But as far as Zoe goes, though, is this stuff happening because of her? But her running off screaming, afraid, and she clearly is afraid of what's going on. It made me I was starting to think, well, maybe there was something to Zoe at this point. But then when she runs off screaming, I'm thinking, well, no, stuff is happening around her, and she's unfortunately involved in some way. So I'm still on the fence about Zoe at this point. Right.
We also learn in this issue that the truck driver that caused the accident, he did it because he was trying to avoid a woman. And at first I thought, well, was that the blonde woman trying to set things into motion? Was she trying to kill Jet for a reason? Although the detective says that witnesses say that they saw the truck driver avoid the woman. So up to this point, nobody has seen the blonde woman except Rachel and Zoe. So I wasn't sure quite how to take that. Was it truly just happenstance, which is something that Terry Moore does play with, especially in Strangers in Paradise? Sometimes things just happen for no reason. So I thought that was an interesting little plot point. I wasn't sure how to quite take it, up to this point.
Yeah, I had the same thought as well. But I assumed it was the blonde for some reason.
So did I. absolutely. I thought the same thing. And because Jet dies, and we find, we see her in next issue. We see, she's talking weird, and she's alive, but she's not. She didn't go through the same ritual that Rachel did. She wasn't buried. She wasn't. And so my notes for the next issue was, well, is Jet going to go through the same thing, or is she going through something different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we simply do not know enough about what's happened in the past to get those connections, I guess.
Right.
And still don't, unfortunately. Okay, so number 8, Rachel, and this happens quite a bit in the series. Dr. Seaman gets called to consult again, this time to help with Jet's revival. Let's see, the blonde goes back to Fire Hill, and that's also something that happens quite a bit throughout the series. People going back to Fire Hill, where the mass grave is. She encounters 2 wolves, whom she seems to be able to direct, to have some control over. And I'm pretty sure of this, Peter. Maybe you have a different viewpoint of this, but she seems to tell one of them to take care of Noah's body by having it eat Noah's body. Is that how you read that scene?
Right.
Okay. And then the other wolf is just kind of laying there, kind of whining. I'm not sure why, because maybe it doesn't get to participate or what, but it was a weird moment there.
I thought of 2 different things about that. The first thought was, okay, is the one wolf a female and the one a male, and she's letting the female eat but not the male? But then when you read ahead and we find out that the foster girl, Libby, that Zoe killed, I think her name's Libby, she wakes up and one of the wolves is with her.
Mm-hmm.
So then I thought, did the blonde lady just tell the wolf to stay there because she knew Libby was going to be resurrected soon? Did it have to match? Because the witch that goes into Libby, her brother was eaten by a wolf.
Yes.
Remember that he tried. So I thought, was she trying to recreate the scene that happened 300 years ago, and that's why she made the other wolf? So I don't know. I don't know the answer.
That's probably it. I forgot about that part about the brother. So
yeah.
Okay. Let's see. Siemens stitches Jet back up, and they is this the point where they talk about the him putting the screws into her neck to, maybe that's the next issue. I can't remember now.
Right. Yeah. He's talking about different ways to try to, her neck was snapped. So
yes.
They're trying to figure out.
Yeah. And there's that funny scene where, they're talking about the situation and she keeps saying, guys, and her neck just keeps flopping back and she can't put it back up.
Right.
Even in death, Jed has a sense of humor.
Yeah.
Or makes me laugh anyway. Let's see, Natalie. Oh, yeah, Natalie. A friend of Natalie's comes by her house to check on her because she hasn't been at work. He hasn't seen her, and so she opens the door and she's wearing this. I don't know. It's kind of a see-through shirt and negligee type thing. I'm not sure yet. And he's kind of taken aback by the way she appears. Anyway, she starts to choke or looks like she's going to throw up. And so he goes and grabs a bowl and out pops that snake again. And we get another icky snake scene. Let's see. And I think that's the last time we saw that guy. So I'm not quite sure why the guy needed to be killed. Maybe that will come in later. Anyway, so the issue ends with I've been really waiting to talk about this part, Peter, with you because I don't know what this is. The issue ends with Zoe up in a tree. It appears to be high up in a tree the way that Terry Moore shows the progression in the panels. But at the bottom of the tree, and this is where it starts. You start at the bottom of the tree, and in the roots of the tree on the ground is this dead woman. And then the panels pan up, and then you see Zoe up in that tree. Who is that dead girl?
I have no idea. Not only is she dead, but she's under the roots of the tree. How does that happen?
Yeah, precisely. At first I thought it
Which
was her sister, but she's not wearing the same outfit that she
No.
was. And so I like I said, I reread through this. I read through that issue again. I read a few issues before that just to see maybe did I miss something? And no. So who is this dead girl and what's her significance?
I think the significance is that because this is twice now that an issue has ended with something weird around Zoe, is to show that Zoe is not what we think. She's not the victim that we think she is. I think, especially because of what we're going to find out next issue, we're suddenly going to go, oh, this little girl is not right. And I mean, first of all, how does she get so high up in the tree?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think it's just meant to be that, because I haven't found any other answer.
Except the fact that all these women dying in such gruesome ways, being such a prevalent part of the series so far, you can't just look at a dead body in this story and not go, what's that about? So
right.
But again, like you say, Terry Moore sometimes just, things just happen for no reason, and maybe this is one of those.
Plus, we also find out later that what you said about women, a lot of women are being killed. They're being killed, but only three, I think, only 3 were resurrected, not counting Jet. So, is that like what you said? Is this just is it a feint? Is it a red herring? Is it on Terry Moore's part? So we don't ever know. The only thing I can say is because of what happens next issue, that Zoe is we're gonna we have to wait to learn about Zoe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't you go ahead and talk about that issue?
Okay. Sorry, I was checking my notes for the previous issue. Okay, so this is the issue where a lot of stuff seems to happen. All right, so first Rachel goes to see Jesse. Again, is that his name? Jesse Lewis.
Yes.
In a panel structure very similar to the first time she saw Lewis, where she drives up in a car and he's still sitting there, very Buddha-like, naked, just in underwear. It's still snowing, and they talk about how birds have gone quiet ever since that blonde woman has ventured throughout the town. So, yeah, people are starting to notice that things are not happening. In fact, he says that she's not around anymore. Rachel's not allowed around anymore because it's scaring his wife, and they think she's cursed.
Mm-hmm.
Now here, the next scene in direct connection to what we talked about at Zoe up in the tree and that dead woman, we see the blonde woman following all these dead cows, and then she goes to a house and there's this old couple dead, and who does she find eating a sandwich, a peanut butter sandwich? We see Zoe, and she says, look, she tells the old blonde woman to go away, and then we finally get the reveal that, and I know when I first read this I thought, is she just saying this? She says, Zoe, you are not 10 years old. You were 10 years old 47 years ago. You were born 57 years ago. There's a demon who lives within you, and she's been looking for this demon for 300 years. And she asks Zoe, can I talk with him? And I guess she has to get permission. And sure enough, Zoe gives permission, and the blonde lady says, can I talk to the demon? Yes, you can talk to the demon. Which demon? Malice. Thank you. And out pops, because she said the name, I guess. Well, first, the blonde woman encases Zoe in this tree, and like this magical tree that comes to life underneath her, and sure enough, out pops Malice, an archangel. Curious that his name is Malice, M-A-L-U-S, and if you think of the word malice, M-A-L-I-C-E, it's kind of interesting because she even says like evil wasn't evil, he created evil. They took his name. which I thought was very interesting. And the blonde woman changes. She's no longer in current clothing. She's in, very fancy, old-fashioned clothing. And we learn that her name is Lilith, and that she had a deal with Malice to take revenge on the city, and it wasn't supposed to take 300 years. And you can tell Malice has another plan, and he makes a comment that, look, it took God 14 generations to make an avatar, meaning Jesus Christ. I'll have mine in 7 if you just let me do my work. But it's not the work that Lilith wants to do. She wants revenge on all the people of Mason. Of Mason or Manson? What is?
I think it's Manson.
Sorry,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Which also has interesting because of just tenuous connection, but the killer Manson. So
right, exactly. There's names mean something in this setting. So we learn, he was supposed to help her take revenge. She doesn't just want revenge; she wants to wipe out the line completely of anybody that had anything to do with killing those women 300 years ago, killing her sister witches. And we learn that the only way that Malice can escape Zoe's body is if Zoe dies. So when he reverts back to Zoe, he has her slit her own wrists. So now Lilith has to try to save Zoe, or else Malice will be free. And then we see that Jet has been fixed with implants so that she can move her broken, or at least hold her broken neck up, and she can walk. And then she gets this flush in her cheeks, and she says, weird, suddenly I'm very hungry. And she says, in fact, I'd kill for a peanut butter sandwich. And who was eating a peanut butter sandwich earlier? But Zoe. So I guess the implication here is that Malice has left Zoe's body and somehow transported all the way over to to Jet. And if it doesn't happen in this issue, then it most certainly he takes possession of her in next issue.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting that you the way you described Zoe's attempt at suicide, because I took it to mean that Zoe herself did it and not Malice. To free herself of the situation, because even though Malice and Zoe share that same body, and in that scene we're seeing Malice, in his true form, or his demonic form, if you will. But Zoe's still there. But it seems like they're separate in this sense in this particular moment, and so I kind of took it because of what Zoe says to Lilith. She was able to do this herself, but maybe you're right. Maybe Malice was, that was his way to get into somebody else.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, no, I can see that, because if you look at the end of their conversation, Lilith is trying to still talk. He says, "We will both be free of the curse that binds ... us ... here." So she tries to ask him a question. He's not talking, and all of a sudden there's a clink. And there's the knife on the floor, in which he looks down. You see Zoe's shoes, and Zoe says, "I finally killed the right person." So yeah, maybe you're right. Maybe it is Zoe not fully understanding the situation and trying to kill Malice, trying to kill herself, and maybe it's not at Malice's hands, thinking that that's the right thing to do, and then realizing, oh nope, that's not, because somehow he has ventured all the way into Jet's body.
Mm-hmm. So Malice wants to basically turn Earth into hell, and I guess kill everybody, or whatever it is. He has plans beyond Manson, and and like you said, Lilith wants to get revenge on anybody who is a descendant of those that did this. So I have to wonder, and I thought of this before when I was rereading stuff, but. So not everybody. Well, maybe that's the case. Is everybody who is a descendant still living in Manson? I can't imagine that to be true. So what is she going to go off and, go to Timbuktu and kill off that family and this family and?
No, I think what you just said is right because there is a line where he says that no one can leave. I'm trying to find it now, but he clearly says no one can leave Manson. I have it here in quotes, so I thought, oh, maybe you know what? Maybe I'm just thinking here. Okay, it says, "Is it not hell to be stuck here forever?"
Oh yeah.
I just took that meaning maybe no one could actually leave the place, and maybe that's why she's able to do what she's going to do to the people there.
Hmm. Well, it's certainly a convenient point. So it makes it easier for her, but I like the idea that the people are stuck there because of their past sins. I think that's an
Yeah.
excellent story point that Moore is presenting us.
Yeah, okay. So if you follow the dialogue here, she says, "You swore that Manson would become hell on earth." And he says, "These things take time." He goes, 300 years, the Roman Empire fell faster. And he says, "Well, that was plague. You asked for hell." And she says, And he says, "Is it not hell to be stuck here forever?" So that's why I think I took it as
Mm-hmm.
maybe no one's able to leave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I could see that. Yeah. Okay. Anything else about that issue, Peter?
Nope.
All right. Go ahead and give us number 10.
All right. Issue 10. Sorry, let me get my notes back up here. Well, we finally I thought the one of a fun not a fun thing, but we meet Carol for the first time in this issue,
Mm-hmm.
and she's at the hospital with Johnny, and Rachel has come to visit her because not only is Rachel with her, but so is Jet, to show her that she's up and walking. And Johnny, of course, doesn't understand why until she realizes, oh, right. Of course. Okay, so she's also now resurrected just as Rachel is. Um, and they leave the room and they realize, you know what? We have to find the little girl. We have to find the blonde. And sure enough, who wheels by them on a gurney but Zoe herself? And they get the story that she was brought in, that some woman dropped her off, and that they really have no information on who Zoe is. But Rachel knows that she's important to all of this, and she doesn't know why just yet, but she's going to find out. Um, so she touches Zoe, and she made a comment in one of the early issues about she's able to see things with her eyes, and by touching Zoe, she has now seen some other things, but she doesn't tell Jet yet, and she doesn't tell any of us yet.
Mm-hmm.
And Jet tries to touch her. She touches Zoe, but she says she doesn't feel anything, so she's not quite sure what she has seen. And when Rachel leaves, we see the word balloon, Jet's word balloon, change. Now it's all black, and she looks very demonic, and she says, "Well, this is new." And again, if you needed any more evidence that malice has taken over, there you go. She's taken over the body of Jet. Rachel goes back to the hill again, and she sees the car wrecks, and she sees open graves, and she sees wolves, and she runs across the foster sister with the plastic still wrapped around her head, and she offers her coat to her, and then she comes in contact once again with Lilith, who is dressed in old-fashioned clothing, and she learns that this is the place where everybody was buried and how they were buried. She learns the whole story of what happened, and she learns some names. She learns Mary Scott's name, that she was 17. She learned that Rachel was 24 when she was killed, that she was hung. Mary Scott's brother was the one that was fed to the wolves. Hannah was 26. And they shoved a copperhead down her throat. So we have to imagine that that's who Natalie is, and that the townspeople, because they weren't sure who was a witch and who wasn't, they just killed every childless woman over the age of 15, 100 women. But they couldn't quite kill Lilith. And while she's telling the story, things are changing, like she's changing facts, and facts are changing from what we know. And sequences, and she was burned, but she wasn't burned, but she was, and she reveals that her name was Lilith, the first woman, and that she wants to bring judgment onto Manson, and she wants to burn it to the ground.
So it's interesting that we get 9 and 10 back to back, where we get all these revelations about these characters and what, their motivations and their goals, pertaining to the whole series. So we're almost to the halfway point, at least where, at the point where what we're going to talk about. And here's all this stuff just kind of thrown at us in those 2 issues. It was really interesting to how Moore has accelerated the storyline in that way.
Right. By the way, I should not doubt Mr. Moore, but there was a previous issue where Rachel says she was 28, and in this issue she's 24. So I thought that was, I don't know. I guess that was just a little bit of a glitch, little editing error.
Yeah, there's something going on here, but I think it does speak to Lilith spinning her lies and trying to manipulate people by telling them what they want to hear, and to her it doesn't really matter. I mean, 300 years have passed. The details don't matter. It's the end result of people's actions that matter, and they must suffer for that. Yeah,
I think that's everything I had for that issue.
Yeah. See, I'm looking at my notes. So there was yeah, you mentioned this has nothing to do with my notes, but you mentioned how when Malice speaks through Jet, the dialogue box turns black. And there's something else that I did not notice this myself. I will be honest. I read this in preparation for our talk, but did you notice, Peter, that all of the men in this story, their dialogue boxes are rectangular?
Square. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to say I think he did that in Strangers in Paradise too, but I didn't double check.
Yeah, I was going to do that too, and I forgot.
Yeah.
So
some of that I wondered if he did that because it's a black and white book. Certain characters, maybe he does that as a way to help the reader, especially if you think back to Johnny. The first time we see Johnny, we don't know that she's a woman. We just see Rachel saying, "Hey, Johnny," and she's talking, and she kind of looks like a woman, but she could also look like a man too. So if you had any question, the word balloon would help you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Okay, let's see. Number 11, the halfway point.
Yes. So really more of the stories here. I kind of mixed in 10 and 11. We're getting more of the story. It's still snowing. Rabbits are eating foxes. The world's going crazy. Or I should say this town is going crazy. And we're learning more about the story of how these witches were burned and Lilith is trying to she's wondering why Rachel doesn't remember this, why the witch that is inhabiting her hasn't come out yet. And Rachel says it was 300 years ago, and Lilith says that was just yesterday for me. So stories about she's learning about what happened to Rachel, how she was killed, how they couldn't burn the witches, and when they found out that those 4 weren't able to be burned, they realized that the town had just killed their own daughters, and boy, what that must have been like for the town. They must have gone crazy. So they kept trying to put Lilith away in a prison, down a well. Nothing was happening, and then all of a sudden the town was hit with cholera. Although Rachel says, "I thought you said it was diphtheria," and to your point, Lilith says, "Diphtheria, cholera, what difference does it make? They were dying. They were poisoned by their own sins." And as she's saying this, she's slowly stripping off all these layers of her old-fashioned clothing, which I thought was kind of a I don't know if he's going for this, but visually, that's such a story about how look how clothing women were meant to wear back then, right? She has to peel off layer after layer after layer to get to herself. And that is such a woman's story, and that is such the story of Lilith and all witches. It just, I thought that was an interesting visual going along with the dialogue here.
Mm-hmm.
And she says, look, I can't let you massacre the town for all of this. And Lilith says, you know what? You said that the last time. So she wraps her up into one of her garments, and Rachel disappears. And we don't know where just yet. But we flash back to the hospital real quick, and sure enough, Malice is in Jet. And the foster worker that put Zoe into all of his homes comes in, and Malice kills her, makes it look like an accident because Malice is Malice. We get that scene with the detective who recognizes that these murders, are happening in a pentagram format, like you said. And then we finally get to see what happened to Rachel in a wonderful visual way, visual storytelling that Terry Moore. She's in the ground, but we see her right side up, but she's actually upside down, buried in the ground, because at the bottom of the panel we see the trees aiming downwards. So it's like the images, he took it and flipped it. It's amazing. I love that sequence at the end. It's just great.
Yeah, that getting that end of that issue is like, wow.
Right.
Yeah, and just imagine being Rachel and again in a grave, and we see her that deep in the grave. Before it was a shallow grave, and she was able to dig herself out easily enough. But to be in that situation, and after having experienced that horror the first time, just imagine what she's going through at the moment. It's just, yeah, it was perfect what Terry did here. From a storytelling standpoint.
Right.
Yeah, it was interesting the when you're talking about the conversation between her and Lilith. When she wraps her in that cloak. Two things about that. So when she first starts to do it, she says, "Off you go now, back where you belong." And like you said, we find out at the end she's in the grave. So, which is very interesting. Lilith is basically, I guess, cutting Rachel off. This is where you're supposed to be. I imagine she expected that Rachel wouldn't be able to get out of the grave, which of course she does. And also, so you're talking about, taking off the layers, and eventually, so she has the cloak part of it, and she's just in that dress. And just after Rachel is transported, and we see that gray smoke type stuff, which I think comes to signify the spirit of the person. So we see that. Lilith is wrapped up, her head's wrapped up in it, and then she pulls it off, and that's when you see that Lilith's hair has changed color.
Right. Oh yeah, right.
And her appearance even looks a little different. Her nose looks different to me. Her forehead is more prominent. Her chin's more prominent. And I want to talk about that in a near future issue here, because it's not just my imagination. Lilith has changed, and there's something about that.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, but that grave scene was just fantastically gruesome. Oh, and you also see here near the, in a shallow grave again, is Noah face down in the dirt. I guess.
Oh, I missed that.
So maybe the wolves didn't eat him completely. I take it that's Noah. He's kind of got the same hairstyle that Noah did. I don't know. It's weird.
Is that in this issue? I'm trying to find it real quick. Where do you see that?
It's the page where we see the ground at the bottom. The top of the ground at the bottom of the panel, and she's deeper in the. So it's in the lower left part of that.
Right. And that would make sense because didn't they say that half of the boy's body was found and the other half was not?
Oh yeah.
Although he looks pretty.
Yeah.
He looks pretty whole.
Maybe they're talking about the inside half.
Maybe.
Okay, so I just want to also touch on this, Peter, since we're at the halfway point. The cover to issue 11, showing Natalie, and it's mostly red, black. There's some yellow in it. It looks very pencil-y.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the portrait of Natalie here, but it's, you know, that copperhead with the red head and the tongue coming out. It's coming out of her mouth. So, and you know, the red eyes with the yellow background, and it's just a very striking cover.
Yeah.
And so as I was going through these, I was looking at all the covers and the color schemes, and there seemed to be a grouping of them. So the first, I think, 6 or so are, you know, green and red. And then the second 6 there's more yellow and red, and there's some black in it. And so I thought, and then as we go into issue 13 onwards, it's more of a purple and gray color scheme that's going on. It keeps getting darker and darker as you go on until you get to, hold on a second, you get to, issue 18 is the last of that color scheme, and then you get to issue 19, and that's when the color palette starts to open up a little bit and transition anyway. But I thought it was really interesting, and I happened to I was researching that, and it turns out that Mr. Moore wanted to do it that way to denote that the color schemes would denote the particular arc within the story. So the first 6 issues is red and green. The second is red and yellow, and so on.
Very
so
cool.
I thought that was interesting. But out of all the covers, number 11 is my favorite. It's really striking, and the colors just kind of pop out at you because Natalie's so pale in it, and it's just a very good cover. I mean, if you're walking in a comic book store and you see that cover, it's gonna stand out to you.
Absolutely.
And this is where I'm going to end the episode as part 1 of our discussion about Rachel Rising. Be sure to come back and listen to part 2, where we cover issues 12 through 22. If you'd like to leave comments about this episode, please do so by emailing me at longboxreview@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.